And that's really what the ultimate sort of future light city is all about. It is about facilitating that expansion of consciousness itself and providing the vessel for that consciousness to step into.
Are you interested in reinventing ourselves for better futures? What do you think about light cities? How can we create conscious urban evolution? Stay tuned for answers from Glenn Drew.
What is the future for cities? Do you want to learn more about them? Do you want to know how others think about them? Do you want to be part of the conversation? Then this is the right place.
Welcome to What is the Future for Cities podcast. Today, I will interview Glenn Drew, CEO of Squeeze.com, TOTECS and Connected Built. We will talk about his vision for the future of cities, intelligent evolution, light cities, AI, retrofitting, and many more. So let's start with a proper introduction. Glenn Drew is the CEO of Squeeze.com, TOTECS and Connected Built. A visionary leader, he fosters innovation and empowers teams to achieve strategic success. Glenn founded his first e-commerce technology company, TOTECS, in 2000, while studying computer science at Melbourne University. Since 2011, he has led the development of Squeeze.com, supporting businesses across wholesale, retail, and manufacturing. With Connected Built, he aims to integrate industry professionals and partners to streamline the built environment, transitioning smart cities to light cities, infrastructure, and next-generation digital ecosystems through seamless connectivity and collaboration. And with that, Glenn, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I highly appreciate your appearance on the podcast. And let's jump right in. What does the future of cities mean to you?
The historical development and progression of the cities that we live in, products of the industrial age, which is the transition from a feudal village model into a factory and worker, white collar, blue collar model. Our cities are built with higher population centres to then service a more modern industrial economy. That's the historical precedence of cities. And what we are going through right now, particularly in the last 10 years, is we're undergoing another revolution, the information and energy revolution, where our cities are morphing and also our way of working and way of harnessing our cities is morphing as well. But the transition from the historical industrial city to the modern cities that we're in is probably a much slower process because it really did start transforming with the advent of the car, the automotive vehicle, and the advent of public transport. So our cities have been built around the car and the public transport system, which is 1900s type technology and thinking. And we now are in cities where the technology is advancing, the modes of transport's advancing. But my notion of the cities of the world right now is that we are in this transitional phase or a metamorphosis from the industrialized city to what I call a light city, an empowered light city. And when I say that, it's because the nature of work is altering. The behavior of people who live in our cities is altering because there's so much more capability now, particularly with information and internet-based technologies, to either not have to do the commute into the city, to be able to either work from home, work in the office, work in a local office, what I say, work where you need to be. And so I think we're going to see more of that transition of people wanting to work in inspiring, delightful places that help them achieve their life goals as well as their working strategic goals as well. But it's got to be an integrated approach. We've gone away from the complete 9 to 5 mindset, but the problem is we're still anchored into a city. Most cities are designed still based on industrial age kind of thinking. I think that as we transition to more empowered light cities, and veer off from this notion of smart cities, I think we've got a really powerful way to transform the way we work, live and play in our cities and our natural environment.
First, a basic question. What does the city mean to you?
The city has three functions for me. First function is, of course, a place to conduct work, meet with people, collaborate. The second function for me is a place of, I would call it services, where health, any other sort of services that are necessary for my life to work, from getting my car serviced to finding parts for things that I have in my work life or personal life. And the third one is probably the city is a place of fun, entertainment, and mixing with friends, family, colleagues.
Is this a physical or a digital space, or a mesh of those two, or something completely else?
That's a really good question. The mesh aspect is very much important because the work that I've been doing in the last 15 years, particularly working with the construction industry in the 3D modeling and the digital modeling space, and trying to solve some of the most tricky problems in that space, because there's a disconnect right now between the supply chain and the way that buildings are designed and constructed. And the utopian mindset is if we could build a 3D digital twin of building and then we could build against that, then that would be the ultimate outcome. And so that is the pathway. But to actually shift the thinking of very much siloed mindsets. I'm the architect, so I just design the building and I just need to make sure it adheres to design intent. I'm the mechanical engineer and I just have to make sure that the energy systems are absolutely accurate. But I have no interest really in the aesthetics or the form of the building other than to make sure that what I do and deliver is functionally delivering to regulation and spec. And so we have still this siloed mindset, and the collaboration across the industry is quite fractured, and the commercial workflows are a little bit fractured and dated in the way that the tendering models work. The mesh idea that you're talking about is the right idea, because the city already right now can't function without the information systems that underpin it. Trains, we know in Melbourne, regularly stop when the signalling systems break down. I won't name names, but basically an example a few years ago was a CTO of one of these public institutions that was responsible for public transport infrastructure. His greatest fear was that certain technologies would fail at critical junction points that could derail the whole system and render it stopped. And that did actually happen. So his fear materialized. So that indicates our city's function on information systems. The mesh is already there. The problem is that there's a disconnect on how to play inside that mesh. And the mesh itself is pretty weak. It's mostly antiquated systems interconnected with people who have knowledge in silos. Again, the silos issue. And that knowledge is not dispersed and distributed and collaborative across the whole spectrum. Because I got so passionate about this, I formed a company with some other really great minds that's called Connected Built. And its job is to work out how can we create ways to develop a more interconnected mesh between the systems that underlie our cities and our assets, the people who work with those assets all day, every day, and the design, construct, and the asset life cycle of that asset so that it is actually fit for purpose throughout its entire life. And how do we ensure that we can collaborate, share data, but honor all of the commercial agreements and relationships that are in play so that everybody can be effective in what they're doing? This is where the future of the light city model comes from. It's this idea that tech is important because it moves data across that mesh. And if that data is structured correctly, then, for instance, a manufacturer component can be specified accurately as a 3D model. It then can be dropped into the building model living in, say, Autodesk Construction Cloud. And then we integrate that through, for instance, our squiz.com platform, which is another company that I'm part of. Having that building model interconnected and pushing and pulling data through the supply chain, but not just in an open slather kind of point of view. It's from a relationship driven point of view. and that's the mesh. Our cities are built around fundamental axioms of humanity. And one of those axioms is that we all have contexts of trust with various people and organizations. And those contexts of trust govern how the city and infrastructure and our environments function. We have to ensure that we model those contexts of trust first in a digital form, so then we can then interconnect and build on top of that. And that's when we will start feeling empowered inside the cities we live and work in. And that will be the metamorphosis and transformation of our experience of cities and feeling a lot more connected into that mesh without it being frightening and scary. And it's going to just know all about me and follow me around. And that's probably the other extreme of that kind of thinking, is if everything and everyone is fully interconnected, then privacy is then compromised potentially. This is a seesaw thing. I believe that we can get it right, and it's already underway. And the great thing is that in our country, particularly Australia, we do have some really bright minds and some extremely good expertise to tackle these objectives.
Could you talk a bit more about this context of trust?
Context of trust is actually a neural structure. Let's pick something simple. How much money is in my bank account right now? There's probably a small circle of people I'm quite okay with that knowledge to be out there. Not that it really particularly bothers me so much, but it's for some people it does. It's a very personal thing, right? So a context of trust is that there's an inner circle of people that you trust with very personal information. Now, if you imagine, then as you interact in society, you're going to build contexts of trust with others who are going to come into agreement with you to do different things. If you consider all relationships that you have and separate the business and personal aspect of it, all those relationships have rules of engagement that we have framed through conversation with those people. And our mind is incredibly powerful at holding that trust mesh together. And then we get more complicated because we want to go and build things in the world. So we get a whole bunch of people together and go, let's form a company, let's employ people, and let's go and deliver an aggregated product or service to a whole community. That forms then yet another entity, yet that's another whole context of trust. Me being a CEO of various companies, tech companies, I hold in my mind all of the different connections and relationships inside the context of that particular organization. The best example of where we don't have a true representation of this is something like Facebook, right? So in Facebook, you have Facebook groups, which are friends. So you have this notion of being a friend with somebody, but you hardly interact with them. So would you say that's a very trusted friend? In fact, if you look at your entire Facebook list, you probably got 500 for the average person. Your 500 friends, I'm sure of those 500, there's really only 10 to 20, maybe 30 that you would probably trust really closely to understand more about your personal world, and you'll interact with them mostly on Messenger and things like that. Then beyond that, you then have to either create Facebook groups, that's a lot of management, but you also have to work out the agreements you have with those people and what then you're going to post and communicate. So when you post on Facebook, you really have to think, who am I speaking to and who's going to get this post? And I play a rule. I post everything publicly so that if I'm ever in front of a judge, I can defend what I say. So that's my rule. Now, the problem is that's really a single dimension concept of context of trust, because Facebook doesn't really offer us too much control over the governance of those relationships. Now let's go to the professional networking platform, LinkedIn. LinkedIn allows us to connect with professionals, and it allows us to say, I was employed with this employer, and this is the kind of history of work that I've done. And there's a little bit of collaboration stuff going on. But again, there's no context of trust beyond my connected neural network of professional contacts. But that's not how I live in the real world. I represent and I wear hats for different organizations. And when I wear that hat for, say, one company, then I'm dealing with all of its context of trust. So if we go back to the mindset of building a city asset or a building, we've got a builder, we've got an architect, we've got mechanical services contractors, we've got manufacturers. So all of these entities have their own worlds and contexts of trust. So unless we can model those contexts of trust, we can't do anything smarter other than pass data around through the lowest common denominator of communication, which is mostly email and LinkedIn messaging and maybe Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, but it's not very smart and it's not very intelligent. Now, to give you an example of where those systems break down is if I walk into a building, does the building know that I'm there for a meeting on level 15? And should the building know? And what if it did know? And if it did know, then it could either, first of all, guide me to the right location, so I don't have to worry about getting security and access, but it also could know that I'm going to that particular company because I'm representing my company and there's a context of trust. And so inside that context of trust, then I'm given certain access to the building. And at the same time, the building is aware where I'm going and what I'm doing. And so if there's an emergency or an issue, the building can technically communicate with me. So the building is an owned entity, and that sits in a context of trust as well, because all of its subtenants or tenancies are effectively the users of the building, and they're providing access to that asset to all these third parties to come and go. These are constructs that platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook just can't actually handle. And so that's what I mean. The context of trust is a human function. It's an axiom of humanity. We all have it in our heads. Where we actually get into disagreement is where our view of a relationship is different to another person's view of a relationship. And the agreement of that trust is different. And this is the thing that's important. Every relationship has different agreements. Those agreements then govern what we share, how we interact, and how we use different things in that interaction, including our built environment. It's like the forgotten part of the entire puzzle, because it's like even apps on your phone. The apps themselves, I would say, from an app point of view, is dumb, because the app doesn't know all of the other apps that are on your phone. And you can't even connect your apps together unless the app provider is a hosted service and it allows its service to connect with other services that other apps interact with. That's also another sort of breakdown in the context of trust. We still think of IT in functional silos and functional domains, and then we get caught up in all sorts of problems trying to integrate things together, because with every integration, the tech is actually easy. We can connect this system to that system. You can connect this system to that system, but you can't share that data to this person because this person doesn't have the clearance for that. And he works for this company and he's only allowed to have that on a Wednesday and not a Tuesday. Those contexts of trust is what we run into very quickly when we start trying to integrate systems together. So if we want to switch into this next generation of what I call light cities, going beyond the notion of smart cities, we really have to solve that puzzle. And that's the work I've been doing in Squiz.com, but also in Connected Built, is bringing that alive and connecting the dots across the built environment.
Thank you so much for describing this context of trust, and your description of every problem comes from our relationships. I just finished the book titled The Courage to be Disliked, which describes the Adlerian psychology. And Adler was one of the three big psychologists with Freud and Jung. And he also talks about that every problem is an interrelated problem. You say that we need to leave smart cities behind. What does smart city mean to you?
I wanted this answer myself. So I created a Smart City Innovators Roundtable in 2018, 2019, and I invited a lot of actors across the built industries to come together. And we had about 40 people. And I asked this question, well, what is a smart city and what does it look like, right? And I got 40 different answers. So no one could really agree on what a smart city was. I loved the idea of smart city when I first heard it, but then the more that you think about it, it's actually a difficult word, because if you put ourselves back into the year 1900 and you look at our city the way it is now, and the person from the perspective of 1900 to now would look at our city and go, my God, that is extremely smart. Look at how it connects and interconnects, and it's just insanely complicated. Because back then they were dealing with the transition of the horse and cart to the automobile. They were just trying to figure out how to stop people crashing into everybody. And this was before the idea of a traffic light. When you think about being in a city where there is no traffic lights to a city where that's just part of the game, that is a point of reference. And you could say right now, Melbourne as it is a smart city. The aspiration of a smart city is quite vague and difficult to define. And it's a difficult conversation to have when you get into the weeds. My view of a smart city is, before I answer that question, the outcome of that conversation was what we were really talking about is a city that could think. A city that could think is a better conversation to have. And I put a question up in the 4th round table that we had. If a building could think, what would it say? If a factory could think, what would it say? If the city could think, what would it say? Because to switch our mind from a functional, siloed, mechanistic idea of the city to now a cerebral view of the city, that the city is a expansion of consciousness itself, and we're all conscious beings harnessing our city. But if the city is a representation of that consciousness and it could think, because that collective consciousness could be harnessed, then we can start progressing towards what the modern notion of the smarter city is, where we are part of the integrated mesh of that city. One aspect that I find really irritating in our cities right now is parking fines. When I last met with you, I had a parking fine and I laughed. It was hilarious, right? It was my fault. I didn't see the sign, right? But I don't want to have to look for the sign. I want to park my car to have a very useful meeting with you so we can paint the picture of what we're doing. I just want my car looked after when it's there. So I want a city that can look after my car and park me where I need to be and say, hey, Glenn, we've got this spot over here. Why don't you go over there? We've got you sorted. I don't care if I have to pay $20 or $30. I just want that sorted. So if the city could think, what would it say? It would say, Glenn, you've got this meeting coming up. So I'm going to park you over here and you're going to have this great meeting. I want you to have your car look up. That's what I want from my city. And then I don't have to deal with this stupid process of following up a fine and reminder notices and all of this nonsense over $90. I didn't mind paying for the spot. My cerebral domain is in a totally different level to where to put my car. So sort that out for me, please, city, and then I'll be a really happy person. That's my idea of a smart city.
I love that the city which can think. Smart city was the idea for you, and now you are talking about light cities. And I would love to understand, what do you mean by light? Is it weightless? Is it full of light? What do you mean by light?
If we think of what we conventionally think of light is visible light in the visible spectrum, right? But light in my definition is the broader spectrum, the physics kind of idea of light, which is just a wavelength and a frequency of energy. All our cities and all of us individually are bodies of energy. And our energy is always interacting with the city and with each other because we're moving in our cities. So we're harnessing our energy or releasing our energy in our movement. We're talking to people in our cities. We're sitting in our offices, we're building things and making things. So it's all an energy exchange. So energy is light as far as I'm concerned. It's just a frequency. And the intercellular energy versus the energy of my lamp lighting up my book, from my point of view, it's just all energy. So when I think of a light city, I think of the illumination of that energy flow across the city. Going back to my example with the car concept, I want the city to figure out how to sort out my car so that I can get onto where I need to invest my energy wisely and effectively. And figuring out where to park my car is not, in my mind, the most cerebral use of my energy. So a light city would do that. It'll just say, Glenn, I've got your back here because I know the work you're doing is at a different level and that's cool. So taking that to another level, right? If the building could think, what would it say? We've got to get out of this mindset of building buildings on time, on budget, and stripping out all of the quality out of the building just to hit the budget target, because probably 25% of the cost overrun is antiquated workflow where there's energy blocks. Energy blocks are everywhere. For instance, if someone specified a building to have a certain set of components in it, and let's say it's 20,000 components of a light fitting, and that lighting fitting manufacturer didn't know about that until later down the track and the job was awarded, and they needed to have those light fittings delivered on site in that building within 12 months. but the manufacturing capacity of that company across the world can't deliver those light fittings within 12 months, then we've got a project blowout because we won't be able to finish off the project. And this is where we get a lot of problems because the construct environment is dealing with all of these complex dimensions, pulling all of the pieces of the puzzle together and building the building on time, on budget. But we start focusing on factoring in all of the waste and putting that into our budget and not factoring in efficiency in making things connect better, and then getting back to the focus on let's design and build a beautiful, highly quality building for its lifetime. And let's stop trying to strip it down so that we can fit within the parameters of budget, and let's start thinking outside the square. How do we connect the dots to make this building a magnificent building so that everybody feels enlivened and lit up right from the start of construction all the way through to its use and over its entire life? So we want to switch the thinking. So if we start switching into, we're building a light building, and we're building a building that has very effective energy systems right from conception, and that its design and form is factored in with the intent of being a masterpiece that is an energy masterpiece so that the energy exchange and building serves its function, then we have the ultimate city starting to transform. It's a metamorphosis process.
You mentioned that the light city is the illumination of the energy flow in the city across different subjects, elements, people, nature, buildings, energy systems, whatever. From your first description, you mentioned this transitional phase, that the city is now in a transitional phase. However, I would assume that the energy flow would never stop. So are we in a transitional phase with an end, or is this a continuous, I would say, urban evolution, but that's just my pet peeve? I'm curious about yours.
If you think about the evolution of intelligence itself, over the last 2,000 years, our intelligence domain has expanded quite dramatically, and it will continue to expand. That I call ascension, ultimately. It's an ascension of our capacity and capability to invent more complexity and make it simple. Because if you think of a car or a vehicle, it's got huge amounts of human capital to create every single component that is in that modern day car. That has taken mountains and mountains of research to arrive at this one thing we call a product. I just marvel at it. I think the fact that we can buy a car for $50,000 or $100,000, I think it's amazing because the amount of IP and intellectual energy in that car is staggering. And our cities are the engine room or the factories that created that intelligence body. Intelligence is expanding and aggregating, and we're just getting more and more capable. So you're right, in the sense that's always an ongoing thing. The transformative period is a shift in agreement of how we work and how we function, because we've been locked into a very sort of industrial age model of thinking, which is not a bad or wrong thing. We're just starting to evolve beyond it now. We're starting to think, actually, I could actually go to work from 7 to 8:30 a.m., which some of our team members do. Then they have 2 hours off to deal with the kids and get them to school and whatever. Then they jump back in at, say, 10:30 and work until 3 o'clock, sort out their kids, and they might jump on later in the evening at 9 o'clock at night. And that's how our company rolls. We don't police that. People just volunteer that time that works for them. And one of the things that drives me nuts as an employer is this notion of timesheets. It's just bizarre because clock on and clock off timesheets is just stupid. If the entire company is operating to the strategic thinking of the expansion of intelligence, everybody will step up to the plate if they're engaged in the game. If they're not engaged in the game, that's okay. Just don't work in our business because there'll be other businesses that you want to be engaged in. It's a transformational mindset of how we want to live, work, and play. That is the evolution and the transformative stage. And then as we continue to expand and ascend in our capacity, intelligence capacity, then we can deal with more complex challenges and problems. And that's really what the ultimate sort of future light city is all about. It is about facilitating that expansion of consciousness itself and providing the vessel for that consciousness to step into. And it's a bit of a dance. It's not just a one-sided thing. We evolve because we shift our behavior and practices. The city will evolve because it tries to match the new paradigm.
You are touching upon the swarm intelligence aspects of what I think the city is, how the city is the emergent property of the urban agents living in them. One shifts its behavior, it influences the city, which in turn influences the other agents' behavior. So that's why I completely believe that each individual living in the city or interacting with the city has the power to change it or influence it in smaller aspects.
Oh, totally. And that's my belief as well, is that if we are an enlightened species, which we are, we have the capacity of enlightenment because what we've caused for ourselves in the last, just think about it, 200 years, it's exciting. It's a very incredible ascension. And then we're now starting to push more frontiers. The work that, for instance, SpaceX is doing to launch a giant 120-meter high vehicle into space. I still marvel at just how awesome that is to throw a rocket that heavy up like that. But that's the kind of expansion of cerebral context that we can step into. And there's lots of people out there with magnificent ideas. And if we shift the thinking into a light city kind of thinking, then how do we form that vessel or reshape the vessel to embrace that new idea of thinking? And yes, every individual has their part to play in that.
Usually at this point, I would ask you whether you really think that humanity is enlightened, but you also mentioned that we have the capability to be enlightened. At the same time, your answers when you describe the future of cities, the collaboration, the light city, the transitional phase, all radiate optimism. Are you optimistic about the future of cities?
I think that has to resonate with being optimistic about life, because I've been put on this planet here in this time and space right now to cause something. That's how I view it. I've got this energy body called my human body, and it's a vessel inside the greater consciousness, which is the cerebral context of all those agreements. And we want to cause things to happen. And there's a natural desire to make a positive difference for the collective consciousness. But that requires a higher level of awareness and clearing from feeling like we're stuck in the quagmire of what our current paradigm is. It's a choice, really. It's a choice inside a consciousness. You can think of our existing city as being glued up in a complete mess, and it's just getting more worse and it's more complex and blah, 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 which is very easy to do, particularly when you're sitting in traffic. You're an hour late to your meeting and your brain is just like exploding because you just don't want to be late. I am an eternal optimist because I'm here for a purpose. And if I'm here for a purpose, then I want to apply my intellectual capacity and expand my own intellectual domain so that I can go on this magical mystery tour of life to cause an expansion of that consciousness and also enjoy the others expanding with me. So it's not just one person that's creating, it's an entire collective field. So my view is very simple. Yes, I'm positive about the future. I agree that the cities right now are getting glued and stuck in an industrial age mindset, very siloed. And I do feel optimistic about a future where if we can unshackle ourselves from the expectation of the current paradigm and reinvent for ourselves what we want as an expansion of our capacity and intelligence, then I think we have a really good future ahead of us for all of our cities and our whole world, I hope.
In my understanding, you are talking about that since you are working, you are also optimistic about it because you are changing it. And I can get behind that so much. What are the three biggest fears or concerns regarding the future of cities for you?
Probably the first fear that seems to be driven a lot right now is that AI is going to replace humans, and that AI and AI technology and AI level automation is going to eliminate the need for us to do anything. That's a utopian thought. I had a fantastic conversation with Professor Leon Sterling at Melbourne University last week, actually. And we talked about AI, and AI is a tool. Everyone says AI is this and that. From a computer science point of view, AI is a superhuman capacity to calculate probability scores at scale and create and form a data model and morph it over time through a feedback loop. That's AI. The problem with AI is that it has bias conditions because you've got to build walls around it. Or if you don't have walls, one, it won't do anything useful. Or two, it will do things that are dangerous and destructive. Where does that boundary come from? It's a cerebral thing. It's an axiom of humanity to put the walls around anything that we craft and create. So AI is just another tool, very powerful tool. And yes, it will do some amazing stuff, particularly with the amount of data it can crunch and process, but it's ultimately driven by us. So we are part of that story. And so the first fear is definitely being replaced and that there will be no work to be done. What will the humans do if there's nothing to be done? So I think that's all bogus. I think that's been a fear that's been around for a long time. If you go back to 1900, the automobile turns up, but there's all of this industry built around the horses. And even horse manure was a big problem in the 1800s in Melbourne and Sydney, I believe, because they just was too much horse manure and they didn't know how to clear it. So they had to have lots of people to clear it. And so those people think, oh my God, here comes the car and it's got fuel and then it doesn't need any grass to feed on. And so that's going to be the end of the horses and that's going to be the end of my work and my job. So guess what? It was the end of that role for them at some point. And then they transitioned and morphed. We've got to step beyond that fear because we live in an age where the expansion of possibility is actually greater than the latency of restraint is probably the best way to say it. So that's the first fear. The second fear is probably actually a fear that I don't have any power to make a positive shift or change. That comes through a lot because I've got to get it done and it's got to stick to budget and I've got to stick within my lane and these are the regulatory rules and I'm not allowed to think outside the square because this is just what I'm supposed to do. So there's this fear to step outside, question, challenge, critique, weigh things are with a mindset to go, we can do this better. And I'm saying this is just broad spectrum. The third fear is that probably maybe this is my fear as well. There's a kind of nearly a breakdown in geopolitical level, and particularly with recent times. There's this kind of reconstruction of the world that feels like it's happening. So the fear is that the world as I know it is going to fall apart and disappear. And then the new world is going to be completely overbearing, over-controlling, full of exploitation, can't trust anyone, all of that, which is quite pervasive right now. So there's this kind of fear that we will lose our independence, our individuality, our own sense of self and trust.
Such small fears and concerns, to be honest. Discussing the fears, you were already talking about the opportunities behind those fears, especially regarding AI. What are the three biggest opportunities regarding the future of cities for you?
First of all is the way we move around cities. I think there's a radical ways of thinking around how we move around our cities. I think we get caught up in massive infrastructure projects based on old paradigm because we started out with 2-lane freeways. That wasn't enough. We needed 3 lanes. We needed 6-lane freeways. And now we need tunnels. So we need more bridges and all of that. So we've actually built a landscape of very big road infrastructure, taking up a lot of the natural space that otherwise could be harnessed for an offset to an urbanization. Now, that's also because we want to move around our city freely. And public transport, as it is right now, is quite clunky, particularly in Melbourne. But Melbourne's a very big expanse. It's like LA. It's a big, huge area. London, it's a much more compact area. So therefore, the London Underground, and particularly good foresight, to have this crisscross network of trains that run every 3 minutes, you're pretty much certain you can get from A to B pretty quickly. Here, getting from A to B can take 2 hours. And if one part of that chain fails, then it's going to mess up my day. That's a major issue we have. So how's that going to change? First of all, technology and transport is altering. We're getting better systems to monitor the transport, monitor the movement. And also, we're changing as well, particularly myself. I don't like an office. I don't mind being in offices, but I prefer to work where I say this, and it's my hashtag, work where I need to be. I want to work where I need to be. But I want a doctor to use the road infrastructure and get to the hospital in the shortest amount of time that they need to, so they can work where they need to be. I would personally prefer the infrastructure to be harnessed by everybody in the way that they need to use it to get whatever they need to get done. So I guess one of the big factors of shifting is the transport, the way we think about moving and transporting around. and the big, giant, multi-billion dollar projects and major budgets around that transport infrastructure based on a very slow evolution of transport technology. That's probably the first thing. The second thing is it's probably about the budgeting, about buildings. I think there's so much inefficiency in current practice that if we make current practice more integrated and more efficient, we're not going to get rid of jobs. We're actually going to alleviate the pressure on projects because the pressure is financially driven. And if we alleviate that pressure, then it'll allow the capacity to go, it'll shift the thinking back into, let's build the best quality asset and stop trying to cut that asset to pieces to make it fit a budget. The third and final thing is I think we could repurpose a lot of our road infrastructure or our space, our urban space, into an integrated natural ecosystem. So the idea of the 15-minute city, which is constantly tied into the notion of smart cities, is for me less important. I don't really particularly care about the 15-minute concept. What I care about is that the city has a good blend of integrated social spaces, parks, natural air. If we can get rid of the fuel and the smoke and all of that, and we've come a long way to do that, can do that, and then we can repurpose some of that space. Well, that's great. But at the same time, we go back to point one. We've got to solve the transport and the movement problem, and fining and taxing people with car parking fees and speeding cameras on every corner and a demerit point system that just hasn't evolved in 30 years because back when they started it, there was probably 400 cameras around Melbourne and now there's 4,000. We've got to get out of this kind of trying to trap the person in the city and find them and tax them to let's empower the person in the city and actually make them feel welcome in their own urban environment and enjoy it and want to live, work and breathe the fresh air, hopefully in the future if it's there.
I might have misunderstood something because you mentioned, and I think you mentioned it previously as well, you mentioned now that the transformation is slow. And in my experience, I just love this exponential curve of the transformation because technology is evolving exponentially. Yep. Did I misunderstand something that you say that the transformation is slow?
The transformation can be fast, but we have to switch to an innovation mindset, the practice. The transformation is slow because we're entrenched into existing agreements and paradigms as to how things work. Now, you can't be too radical and break everything and break the way things work. For instance, in the construction industry, it's built on a tendering model. And it's pretty bogus, right? Because an architect will put the design out to the builders, and the builders will go and re-architect effectively the built asset. And there might be 7 or 8 tendering for the job. And they're all re-architecting it. So all this human manpower is going in to create this new asset. And then they eventually throw that out into the supply chain and it all gets costed. And there's all this crisscross of quotes and everything going on. And then it all rolls up and it's submitted to the owner as a price. That's the current paradigm. Now, is that the way we should be thinking about how to construct, build and do projects? So I've come across different models. Various groups are trying to look at, can we shift that mindset from this old school tendering process and how do we come up with smarter ways to harness that human capital? And can we have better collaboration between the builders? And maybe they do different parts of it. I don't know, but maybe there's a different way to think about the problem so that we're actually investing all that intellectual energy, which is costed already, and creating a better quality asset. Because those builders, even if they lose the job, they're having to factor that as a cost because it's taken the entire workforce to get that far, right? So they budget based on winning 3 jobs, but pitching for 10. And that could be some serious amount of capital invested. So what if the profitability was better because there's more collaboration? How do we get that to happen? First thing is that we have to shift the thinking, and shifting thinking is hard. We have to bring the parties together and go, what is the different way that this could be done? So again, it's not a technology problem. The technology is available. The capability is available. It's an agreement of how we want to work and operate. And I think that is a slow process and it's a metamorphosis. That's why I say that. But it will become, and it is becoming exponential because the technology is breaking through and every party, when you see a new piece of tech, you flock to it. And you're starting to try and mess with it, play with it, and work out how you can harness it. And so it will follow. But if we have a mindset, an innovation mindset to do a positive contribution to the world, in whatever we do and we set our heart, mind and soul to, we'll use our energy more effectively and we will start morphing very quickly. So I believe it's all possible.
I would love to see let's sit down, collaborate on the metamorphosis, and let's change our minds and these paradigms in an agreeable way. I am also curious whether technology and the upcoming solutions will allow such a peaceful transition, because I believe that if an industry is not willing to change with the changing environment, then they will be just left behind. And as an architect, I am not fearful, a bit angry about that the architecture profession hasn't changed in the last 200 years. Although we have better tools, we haven't changed the system or the approach itself. So that's why it's very interesting for me that you say the transformation will be slow, because I think that those players who will not change with the better solutions will be just left behind because they can't compete with the new solutions.
That's right. But that's what's important about podcasts like this, because the only way to cause change is to discuss and throw this around. You can throw and discuss as much as you like, but you've got to go and put things into real world action. That's the hard part, is which part do we shift first? So that's why in our businesses in Squeeze.com, we want to cause this notion of a smart asset. We wanted the industry to bolt their systems and data into a smart asset, which acts as that context of trust for all the asset ecosystem. That was too slow to wait for the building industry to catch up. So what did I do? I got together with some people, and I'm actually at our R&D factory here doing this podcast with some other guys that I know. And we just said, let's go build a real world product that we could make a smart asset. That's another business we call Circular Things. And it's going to take recycled inputs and remanufacture products that are useful in circular economy initiatives. That then formed our first product, the Water Wall, which is a domain thirdspace.build, so you can go find it. And the whole idea of the Water Wall was not just to build a water panel fence. That's the core proposition of it. My attraction to the idea was we can turn your fence into a smart asset and sell and water and transact the water we're capturing with the estate. And others in the estate who want to use the water and grow things or use it for parks and gardens can, because they can get access to that water that's captured. That was something that I found much better and easier to do, because I could then go into action, create a company, build a product, turn it into a smart asset, prove the technology and the workflows, and scale it up. And if we can, then that becomes the model. So people then go, aha, we could take that smart asset concept and bring it to a building. And then we can start hooking all of that together. And that's the idea. So you've got to take ideas and you've got to then put it into action. And putting it into action requires investment, time, energy, and commitment to see it through. And fortunately for our group, we have, and it's a very exciting product. But it's possible. Attitude to innovation and companies and forming organizations to do this innovative work is very stuck in 1900s thinking. These entrepreneurial people with entrepreneurial creative minds have to struggle their way to prove their ideas work. And then eventually the investor comes along and throws them a bone and they can go and start accelerating their companies, right? We've got to get rid of this stupid mindset. And we need to invest into creative energy to go and create these products, or try it, have a go. If it fails, okay, that's fine. But we need that failure culture to start emerging, because it's through that we learn and we ascend. I'm very supportive. I'm an entrepreneur myself, but I'm supportive of anyone who wants to try an idea and really accelerate that idea into the world and prove the point and say, yep, my theory around this is right. And then others will follow. And I think we've got to return to that model, and we've got the capacity, because we're a very innovative nation. We need to support that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, and that will cause the transformation of our cities even faster. There's a huge opportunity to do that. There's an enormous amount of capital that can do that. It just needs political will. And we need to break ourselves out of this industrial mindset of hoarding all this capital at the top in the massive corporations and just letting it bounce around in superannuation funds, and getting that capital back into the innovative economy and starting to shift rapidly and building a new ecosystem of organizations and economy and a transformation for our cities. I think it's very doable and we have the right mindset for it.
Interestingly, in episode 298, Karina Gormley talked about the need for room for failure in governance. So there are also voices which advocate for such allowance to experiment, fail, try again, learn from those things. So we talked about the fears and opportunities. I would love to understand what are the 3 biggest strengths regarding the future of cities for you.
One is access to good technology. If you think about it, 20 years ago, our computing technology was infant. The capacity was always limited to hardware. This is what caused the dot-com crash, because there's wild ideas, radically good ideas, right? Most of them, but no infrastructure and no compute capacity to deliver on these ideas. But nobody really worried about that. And boardrooms were just making decisions about, yes, let's throw $20 million at that. It's a good idea, but we don't have a telco network that can deliver high-speed internet, so that idea will fall over for a little while. We're lucky now because the infrastructure's there, the connectivity's there, the intelligence frameworks are there, and the knowledge and intelligence is there. So I think we're in a really lucky stage in history, to be honest. We've got compute power that is very vast and in excess of what we can harness, and energy infrastructure that's available to us now. And we have innovative capacity and a lot of really good people to do that work. I think it's a very exciting time to be alive.
What is your role in establishing the future of cities?
My rule for myself is to live the dream. And people ring me up and go, how are you going? I said, I'm living the dream. I used to say I'm busy. I always said I'm busy, right? But if I keep saying I'm busy, what I do is I create the listening of busyness. And in actual fact, people were fearful of ringing me up because they were always assuming I was busy. And I realized I created that. So my mantra is I'm living the dream, because I'm working where I want to be and I'm living and playing where I want to be. So I don't relate to life as I'm stuck or I'm in a hole or whatever. I relate to my life as I'm absolutely living my dream. I'm living and working on the things that really inspire me and light me up. And it does inspire me and light me up to shift our paradigm of the way we live, work and play in our cities, because that is the majority of our life. And that's where we spend a lot of our time. It's something I'm very passionate about. For me, it's living my dream. And in my dream, that is my imagination and my perspective of how the evolution of us as a species and a society and a city, or as an urban construct and community, can manifest. And so literally living my dream. Being here on your podcast is living my dream.
I appreciate that very much. And we learned your mantra, but what is your role in establishing the future of cities?
It's a very good question. I guess I'm a manifester of vision, and I manifest complexity into simplicity. If you think about the topics I've just been talking about, connecting the dots across the built industry, imagine trying to picture that, all the different systems and software and all the different companies and all the different actors and the supply chain and all the different workflows. It's a very big, complex puzzle. My rule is to manifest that to simplicity, is to break it down, look at the axioms and the constructs, the immutable truths, and then work out how to aggregate, simplify, and then cause a game so that others can step into it and take ownership of it themselves. Because it's not about me. It's actually about the expansion of all of our abilities and conscious abilities to step into new ways of thinking and doing. And so my job is to deliver that new way of thinking and doing by being the example of it. That then triggers, like popcorn, it just triggers others to go, yes, we could do this and we could do that and blah, blah, blah. And that's just exactly how my whole career has worked. My role is to basically break new ground with innovation and high complex thinking and simplifying it.
Glenn, thank you so much for your time, and please keep up the good work, because complexity bringing down simplicity is freaking important. So we need that. Do you have any closing comments or requests for the audience?
I always like to leave people with something to do. So I always like to say that if there is something that this conversation has triggered in you, to map out that idea and either cause a conversation that triggers a yes in somebody else to go, yes, let's do that. And if that then manifests and morphs into something bigger, then that's even really in alignment with what the intent of being here is all about. So that's what I'd love people to do. Take that, cause a yes with a new idea or something that's just sparked in their mind, and make something happen in the world for the betterment of all.
Thank you so much, Glenn.
No worries.
It was really interesting to hear from Glenn about the need for urban retrofit and repurposing urban spaces, not to mention his advocacy for failure culture. Karina Gormley asked for more room for failure in government in episode 298. You can find out more about Glenn online, or the links are in the show notes. What was the most interesting part for you? What questions did arise regarding Glenn's approach to the future of cities? What have you learned from this interview? Let me know on Twitter at WTF4Cities or on the WTF4Cities.com website where the transcript and show notes are available. You can also subscribe on the website not to miss any new episodes and leave some feedback. I hope this was an interesting interview for you as well, and thanks for tuning in.
What is the Future for Cities podcast?